delighted to say, in the circumstances. David Gillick joins us on the line. Good morning to you, David.
Hey, how's it going? You all right?
Good, and thanks a million for jumping on this morning. We wanted to mark, obviously, the passing of the great Jerry Kiernan, a Kerry man, a national champion, long-distance runner, an Olympian, a football fan, obviously, and no doubt much more to his family as well. It doesn't go near, really, even that, to capturing the essence of the man.
No, like, you know, it's how do you sum all that into one or two words? I think, you know, Jerry's passion for his sport was the thing that I'll most remember. He was an athletics man through and through, and he loved it, and he put so much time back into the sport. Like you talked about, 84 when he was ninth in the Olympic Games, winning the Dublin Marathon twice, 2:12 for a marathon, sub 4-minute mile. All these from his athletic ability is brilliant, and still will be brilliant today. But I think when you look at Jerry, everything he gave back into the sport, whether you were someone, you mentioned Kieran McGean at that level, or you were someone who was new to running, Jerry would give you the same amount of time. It was phenomenal. I can remember going down to UCD on numerous occasions, and you'd see Jerry with his group of athletes, and the range would be so broad. It would be people new to it. There'd be people, looking to go to Olympic Games, and his passion for it was brilliant. And look, he was an interesting character. He was, as you know, a teacher, so he had this broad range of knowledge, and he could talk to you and he could debate to you on any topic. And I think that's what people kind of really knew about him, because he was outspoken. I think when you look at kind of athletics, he transcended sport in Ireland. Everyone, whether you liked athletics or you didn't even watch it, you knew who Jerry Kiernan was. Probably because I was mad hair, but that's what made him quite unique. But as a Kerry man, he hated GAA, and he would tell everyone that. And the nice thing about it was, like, for a small sport, he was vocal, he was outspoken, and people listened to him because he could always back it up. He always had an argument, and he wasn't shy about it. And even with me, he used to always tell me, David, you should be doing 800 meters. You should be doing 800 meters. The thing about Jerry is he'd say it to your face. He wouldn't say it behind your back. He'd say it to your face,
That's really interesting. Was that always the way when he spoke to a sprinter, saying, you should be doing a bit of a longer distance?
It did become a bit of a running joke, over the years, where like, Jerry would have you moving up, but like, he'd always have his reasons, and he'd break the event down. He'd look at the times. He wasn't just saying it just for the sake of being argumentative or kind of opinionated about it. He would break down the times, and he'd say, well, look, if you're running 45 seconds now, you could run, 143, 144, that could get you a medal here and there. So there was reason to it. And that's the thing about Jerry. Like, even though he was coming from the longer events, let's say, like the marathon, he would go and he would research every single event. Make no doubt about it, when he was on a panel, he could talk about any event because he'd go and he'd research it. And that was one thing I noticed when I started doing a bit of punditry. I was brand new to it back in 2012, and I was in the studio and I was nervous, and how do you go about this? Jerry would help you. He'd help you. He'd tell you how to kind of, prep and prepare, and, what athletes to look out for in events that would be unfamiliar to me, So, as a young fella kind of breaking into that kind of side of things, he was very helpful and accommodating, and that was warm, that was nice,
And like you mentioned earlier, David, that he was known in households around the country, regardless of whether you're into athletics or not. And I think some of that was down to those points that you've mentioned, that he could cut through it all to make it very simple for the likes of us who don't know the ins and outs of specifically about an event around athletics. And you also knew he wasn't bullshitting you.
No, and you're right. And I think, the way he kind of came across, he was very articulate, he was very knowledgeable, and he kind of put it in understandable terms. And athletics can be a hard sport because it's very statsy, there's a lot of numbers, and it's kind of hard for people to relate to, because not many people might have thrown a shot, or not many people might have ran a marathon, So he always had a nice way of kind of breaking it down, and I suppose, like, dumbing it down, really, and making people understand it. And he'd always have, like, he'd link it to something. As you know, he's a big fan of his soccer, like Barcelona and all this, and he'd always link it back to maybe things that people would understand, and therefore will come across in a nice kind of easy way.
For the people then who worked with him, you didn't ever have an official sort of a formal, any coach-athlete kind of relationship, David?
No, I didn't. Obviously, Jerry was more focused on the middle to long distance. So he was sprint based. But the thing about athletics in Ireland is, like, it's small. So, like, I can remember Jerry at events, you know, when I was a young lad, he'd be there and that's the other side of it. Like, you know, he'd be looking at, say, Olympics or World Championships, and we'd see him on TV in relation to those events. But you could go down to like a local cross country or a graded meet in Irishtown, and there's Jerry. You know, he was always at these races, and everyone would have known him because of that. And he'd always give you the time. He'd always talk to you, and he was always a good man for spotting talent as well. And that's a big thing, you know, because there's a huge drop off of athletes in athletics. You know, but Jerry was always there to kind of like nurture talent. And as I said, UCD, Marley, around, you know, he lived in Rennes. So like all that side of the city, you'd see Jerry running around and with a group of athletes. And, you know, I think, to be honest, like, I think that was the biggest value, was what he gave back to the sport. And I think, you know, even this week I was talking to a few people, and he was still coaching. You know, he was still,
was he?
You know, he was still sending messages out. People were still in touch with him. And I think it came to a shock to a lot of his own athletes. And it's hard for an athlete that, like, when they lose their coach, because, you know, they've set everything out. There's months of prep gone in, and then there's plans, you know, all the way into the summer. And like, I think there'll be a lot of people that will like, they'll miss him. They really will.
Where does the 1984 men's marathon rank in terms of the great Irish athletics moments?
Whoa, it's up there. You know, when you look at having two Irish vests at a 20-mile mark in an Olympic marathon. And I think John Tracy said it as well. He kind of he hit 20 miles, and he looked over, and there was Jerry, and he was thinking, Jesus, what's going on here, you know? But like, that's it. You know, I suppose 84, like, I was only one, you know, and I would have missed all that, really. And it's only when, like, even last night I was watching back on some of the old kind of footage and things like that, and it's phenomenal. Like, when you consider the heat and everything that went into that marathon, to have two Irish athletes, you know, up there, top 10, and that 9th place, you know, obviously it's overshadowed because Tracy got the silver, but like, even a 9th place finish is absolutely phenomenal, and 2:12 as well. And then when you take it a little bit further with the Dublin Marathon, you know, he set the course record. I think it was about 2:13. Now, that stood for nearly 20 years. You know, these were fast times. And then to go and do a sub-4-minute mile, like, you know, not many people can do these things, even today. And I think when you look at the numbers and the stats, you do kind of realise, God, like, Jerry was actually a very, very good athlete.
Mm. What do you, any insight into what sort of a coach he was, David? Like, it's such a tactical and technical sport. Like, it maybe leans a little less on the emotional side, maybe, than some other sports. But yeah, what kind of a coach was he?
Well, from what I can gather, and from kind of some of the athletes that I know, and obviously, you know, interviewing some of the athletes, like, for example, Kira and things, that he was a very encouraging coach who believed in his athletes. Like, you know, Jerry would have worked with a lot of people who maybe had a couple of injuries and then kind of got back into it. And one of the biggest things that I've heard is the belief that he instilled in his athletes. You know, that belief that they can get back, that belief that they can run fast times and, you know, win national championships and make international teams. And I think from that perspective, like, that's a huge, huge thing, that there's a level of trust there. And that's one thing that really kind of came across. And also the very hands-on approach. You know, he's always there with his athletes through their sessions. He'd be down, you know, trackside or down on the fields in UCD and places like that. And he was always giving his time back to his athletes, be it to traveling with them to races around the country or even internationally, or, you know, literally most days, most evenings, you know, with them running. And also, don't forget, like, Jerry was still running. You know, Jerry was very, very active. So he would be always jumping in with sessions with some of the people that he was coaching. So I think from that perspective, very methodical in his coaching, you know, very planned out, very looking at the when you want to peak and then bringing it all the way back and making sure that it's balanced. You know, you're not over killing athletes, which is a really important thing. So I think there was a lot of knowledge there, and he's been in the game so long. And the other thing again is he's done it. You know, he's been up there, and he's, you know, even in his own kind of races, he you know, there's races that went well, races that went horribly wrong, and that's a big, huge learning thing for a coach. And then to give that to the next generation is very, very important and very valuable.
Yeah, and he'll be missed. And 67, it's too young. David, thanks a million for taking the call this morning.
Cheers, guys. Have a good morning.
Thanks. David Gillick there, and our condolences to Jerry Kiernan's family and to the wider athletics community as well. Terribly sad news.